6-year-old boy had to testify against his own mother. Amanda Lewis was a single mother who worked as a nursing assistant at a local clinic, and she lived in Esto, Florida with her 7-year-old daughter Adriana and 6-year-old son AJ. Adriana was described as energetic, outgoing, and always smiling. She loved the attention and could light up an entire room. But AJ was much quieter and he preferred to keep to himself. On August 8th of 2007, Amanda returned home from work very tired and wanted to take a short nap before taking the kids out shopping for school supplies. On that specific day, it was a very hot day and Adriana and AJ wanted to get into their pool, but Amanda told them no since they were going to be leaving soon. Short time later, AJ walked in the home to tell his mother that Adriana was in the pool. At first, Amanda thought he meant that Adriana was playing near the pool, but as she looked outside, she saw that AJ was reaching his hands inside of that pool. He quickly ran outside and found Adriana floating face down. Amanda immediately pulled her daughter out from the pool and called 911, begging dispatchers for help because her daughter wasn't breathing. Emergency responders rushed to the home and Adriana was rushed to the hospital, and the doctors fought to save her life for over an hour, but she ended up passing away. Police initially believed that this was just a tragic accident. The pool ladder had been placed into the shed, so maybe Adriana just fell into the water and was unable to get out, and the case was closed. That was until AJ started talking, not to the police, but to his grandfather, and he stated that his sister's death was not an accident. According to him, Adriana was playing with a window cleaner, making a mess, and this made their mother really upset, so she grabbed Adriana, threw her in the pool, and held her underwater. When police interviewed AJ, he told the same story, but then things started to change. He stated that he was inside when it happened, then he stated he was outside by a tree and he saw everything that happened. So they were trying to figure out if AJ was even telling the truth. As police were digging deeper, they went inside of the home and they could smell the strong urine smell coming from the kids' room. There was no sheets on their beds, the house was a mess, and there was no toys in sight. 1 month after Adriana's death, Amanda was arrested and charged with murder. Since the only witness to this crime was AJ, he had to testify against his own mother, which resulted in him bursting into tears. AJ testified that his mother threw Adriana into that pool and held her underwater, and he even made a drawing of where everyone was standing on that specific day. The defense stated that AJ couldn't be trusted because he kept changing his story around. Mind you, he was only 6 years old at the time. But prosecutors presented evidence that would support his claims. Then came testimony from Amanda's coworkers, and they stated that Amanda was so frustrated with Adriana that she wanted to unalive her because she couldn't take it anymore. Amanda stated that she did tell them that, but she didn't really mean it. Just a few hours later, they reached a verdict, and Amanda was found guilty of first-degree murder of her 7-year-old daughter and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Years later, AJ stands by his testimony and states that he told investigators exactly what he saw. Today, AJ has changed his name and he is now working as a firefighter.
Remember Sherry Papina, the woman who faked her own kidnapping, sparked a nationwide manhunt, and they got exposed for lying? Well, now she's saying that it wasn't a lie, that she was really kidnapped, and that she only made up the story because she thought that her ex-boyfriend was going to kill her. Which, if you follow this case from the beginning, then you would know just how wild that sounds. In 2016, Sherry had disappeared while jogging in her neighborhood. For 22 days, her husband and her kids thought that she was gone forever. Then she reappeared, bruised and burned up, with a chain around her waist, claiming that 2 Hispanic women had taken her. And at first, everyone believed her. But then the DNA came back, and it didn't belong to her attackers, it belonged to her ex-boyfriend, James Reyes. He told police she was not kidnapped, she was hiding at his house the entire time, and had asked him to hurt her so that it looked like she was abducted. She even had him brand her. But now Sherry is flipping the entire story again. She says she was really kidnapped, that James had trapped her, he abused her, and that the only reason she lied was to protect herself from someone even more dangerous, her husband, Keith Papina. She said their marriage was emotionally abusive and that telling him about the affair would have been worse than going to prison. I can't take this serious right now. And in her own words, prison was far safer than the consequences I'd suffer if Keith found out. But James just denied everything. Authorities still say that James was manipulated by her, that Sherry is the mastermind behind this. But she is standing firm on her story. She even told ABC News, quote, "To be clear, there was one thing I lied about. Everything else was accurate and true. I just lied about the identity of my captor. So now she's pointing fingers at her ex-husband, Keith. I cannot be the only one questioning. Is she lying through her teeth just to seek attention? Or is this actually a woman who is trapped between two abusive men? So do you...
On the 20th of July 2012, a cinema in Aurora, Colorado was premiering a midnight release of the highly anticipated brand new Batman movie, The Dark Knight Rises. It was being showed in a large screening and the cinema was absolutely packed with fans who were excited to see the film. 24-year-old James Holmes was also at the cinema, but he had no intention of watching the movie. In fact, only minutes before he went into the screen, he actually called the police and expressed that he had a desire to kill, but for whatever reason, the call was disconnected. When James arrived inside of the cinema screen, he snuck out of the exit door, propping it open. He walked to his car in the parking lot and changed into protective gear, including a bulletproof vest, retrieved several guns and 2 cans of tear gas. He headed back into the screen, sneaking through the fire exit door that he had propped open, and chucked the tear gas before immediately beginning to fire into the audience. And sadly, for a split second, some of the people that were sat in the audience thought that this was fake, that this was some sort of actor, because at the moment in time that James came back into the screening on the actual film, the Batman movie, there was a gunfighting scene. Or some of the audience for a very split second thought that James was an actor. James wildly fired into the audience and began to target people who were trying to escape. Sadly, 10 people would be killed instantly inside of the screening, 2 other people would later die in hospital, and 70 people were injured. The police would arrive within a minute of the first 911 call reporting the shooting, and the 2 officers who arrived at the scene first spotted James, and because he was wearing so much protective gear, they initially thought that he was a part of the SWAT team. He would be quickly and easily arrested. He did not try to resist arrest whatsoever. At his trial, he pled not guilty by reason of insanity. However, he would be found guilty of murder and handed a sentence of life without the possibility of parole.
How does an NFL superstar end up allegedly unaliving multiple people? Like, he played for the New England Patriots. He had a $40 million contract, a mansion, a fiance, a baby girl. Tom Brady was literally his quarterback. How does someone with all of that end up here? It all started on a night out in July of 2012. Aaron Hernandez was out clubbing with a friend like he usually did, nothing out of the ordinary, until this guy, Daniel, accidentally bumped into Aaron and spilled his drink on him. There was no fighting, no shouting, no big scene. Daniel just kind of laughs it off and kept it pushing. But Aaron, he doesn't. To him, it seemed like he just been disrespected. And a few hours later, he made a choice that he could not undo. Daniel and his friend Safito were just sitting inside of their car. They were talking, maybe laughing, when a black SUV pulled up right beside them. No one got out. It was just a window rolling down. But completely out of nowhere, 5 gunshots straight at Daniel and Safito. Both men were killed instantly. Somebody had just come and executed them right there. An eyewitness said that the SUV that pulled up looked exactly like Aaron's, but there was never enough evidence to charge him. And after that night, Aaron just kept on spiraling. He became extremely paranoid. I mean, he thought that everyone was out to get him, so he would stash weapons under his bed, in his car, anywhere he could. And at some point, he allegedly shot his friend Alexander in the face and dumped his body in the Miami parking lot. Alexander luckily survived, and he never spoke out about it until years later. But still, Aaron's rage did not stop there, because that is when Odin Lloyd came into the picture. Odin was also a football player. He was dating the sister of Aaron's fiance, so they were basically family. But somewhere along the lines, Aaron told him something. We still don't know exactly what. Maybe it was about the 2012 shooting, maybe something else. Whatever it was, Aaron started seeing him as a threat. So on the night of June 16, Aaron had actually made a plan to take him out. He had texted 2 friends from Connecticut and texted them, quote, "Get your ass up here." And when they arrived, the 3 of them got into a rented silver Nissan Altima and drove to go pick Odin up. But at around 3:22 a.m., just moments after getting picked up, Odin sent these 3 really weird messages to his sister. "You saw who I was with? NFL, just so you know." It's like he knew something wasn't right. They eventually pulled into a secluded industrial park, which conveniently had no cameras, no lights, and no one around to see what the hell they were planning to do. There they pulled out a weapon and shot Odin 5 times. 2 in the chest, 1 in the back, and 2 more when he was already on the ground. And then they just left him there face up in the dirt. Aaron tried to cover up his crime like he did in the past, but the police found shell casings, tire tracks, and surveillance from multiple multiple homes, showing everything they did. They even managed to track the rental car that was used to go pick up Odin, registered to Aaron's name. I'm not gonna lie, you could have been more slick about it. And once he realized he was gonna get caught, he rushed to his football team and said, please, please, you have to believe me. They did not believe that man. 10 days later, he was arrested and the Patriots cut him off that same day. By 2015, he was found guilty of unaliving Odin and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And by 2017, Aaron had taken his own life in jail. And I just think this case wrecks every idea we are sold about success. If you're still here, I love you guys so much. I will see you in my next video. Mwah, group hug.
He ended the life of his 4-year-old sister to punish his mother. 14-year-old Paris Bennett was from Texas. He was talented, smart, had an IQ of 142, and loved art. From a very young age, it was obvious that something wasn't right with him, but family and friends couldn't put their finger on it. Paris was born to his mother, 18-year-old Charity Lee, and when he was born, she was facing battles of her own. From a very young age, her father was unalived by her mother, and because of this, she resulted in substances. She told herself that if something didn't drastically change within 3 months, she was going to end her own life, and that next month she ended up pregnant, and this would result in her sobriety. When Paris was 9 years old, Charity gave birth to a little girl and named her Ella. He adored his little sister, but during that time his mother relapsed and he had to take care of the home, his sister, and himself. As time went on, Paris became angrier and angrier. He would bang his head against the wall until he bled. He would chase his mother and grandmother around the house with a knife, and this resulted in him going to a psych facility for a week. For a while, things seemed to have settled down, but what Charity didn't know was that Paris was plotting a plan to punish his mother. Charity was getting clean, but it was a little bit too late for that in Paris's mind. He had a plan to unalive his mother, but on February 4th of 2007, he came up with a new plan. On that night, 4-year-old Ella was asleep in her bed while Paris was talking to their babysitter, stating that his mom said it was okay for her to leave an hour early while she was at work. And at first, the babysitter was kind of hesitant, but ended up agreeing and left early. Paris went into Ella's bedroom, SA'd her, and stabbed her 17 times. He spent a total of 6 minutes on the phone chatting with a friend from school, then waited another 2 minutes to call 911 to admit what he had just did. The dispatcher was giving him instructions on how to do CPR on his sister, and although he said he was doing it, he was just staring at her dead body. Police arrived and Paris was arrested, all before Charity got home from work. When Paris was asked why he did this, he stated it was because he was mad at his mother and he believed that this would be the best punishment for her. Paris was eventually clinically diagnosed as a psychopath and he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Despite this awful crime that he had committed, his mother Charity would often visit him in prison. He even tried to choke her and told her that he liked it when he saw her sad. Charity went on to have another son and named him Phoenix, and she would allow Paris to talk to him on the phone. After Paris's incarceration, Charity founded the Ella Foundation, which stands for Empathy, Love, Lessons, and Action. In January of 2021, Charity cut all ties with Paris, stating that he has not changed at all. Paris will be eligible for parole in 2027, and Charity stated that if he does get released, her and Phoenix will go into hiding so that they're not his next victim.
What are you supposed to do when there is a man hiding in your closet? Like, not a monster, not your imagination, but an actual creepy man watching you. Well, that's what happened to 8-year-old Shasta. She was getting ready for bed when she saw this strange figure moving in her closet. And scared, she told her brother about it, but they just laughed it off, thinking that it was just her imagination. So he climbed into bed with her and they fell asleep just like usual. But in the middle of the night, their mom wakes her up screaming, dragging her into the living room where she sees her stepdad and brother zip tied face down. And then this strange man walks out of the shadows holding a shotgun. And in that moment, Sasha's heart froze because she realized she was not imagining things. That figure in the closet that was moving, it was real. It was him. This forces her mom to the ground. He ties up Shasta, grabs her brother Dylan, and carries them both outside. Then he goes back inside the house and unalives Shasta's mom and dad. The man was Joseph Duncan. He is an American serial killer and who had just been released from prison. Why do they always release the most evil people? Joseph had been stalking Sasha's family for days, and now he had exactly what he wanted. 2 young children. He took both Sasha and Dylan to an isolated area in the woods, and there he held them captive for weeks. Joseph tortured both children, assaulting them over and over and over again, until one day he took Dylan away. God knows what he did, but Joseph came back alone. At that point, Sasha already knew my brother is gone, and she was prepared for her life to be taken next. But then for some reason, Joseph decides to bring Shasta to a Denny's. Now, Joseph was not the smartest, which is a good thing because he really thought that nobody would recognize her. But what he didn't know was that Shasta's face was all over the news, and one of the waitresses immediately recognized her. And without flinching, she went to the back and secretly called the cops. Joseph was immediately arrested on the spot and was sentenced to death for their murders. But before they could execute him, he ended up dying in prison because of brain cancer. Shasta survived the unthinkable. I cannot even imagine her pain. She lost her whole family.
When I tell you that this is the most disturbing missing persons case, I 100% mean it. Because you don't just go missing after jet skiing with a creepy man that you just met on vacation. Max DeVries was 14 years old when he went missing while on vacation with his family in Aruba back in 2004. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance are bizarre, and nothing has disturbed me more than learning about what happened to him, so let's talk about it. Part of the reason why this story is so horrifying is because in 2002, just 2 years before Max would vanish, his dad would suddenly die after having a heart attack. This would leave Max's mom to raise their 2 children alone, which is already devastating enough. But fast forward to May 12th of 2004. The DeVries family, which now consisted of Yvonne, her 14-year-old son Max, and his younger sister Dominique, were simply just trying to put their lives back together. They decided to plan a fun family vacation to Aruba to take their mind off of things and altogether heal. They all stayed at the La Cabana Resort, and they were so excited to hang out on the beach and play in the water. Growing up, they had a sailboat, so Max specifically loved the water and knew how to swim really well. A few days into their arrival, Max was playing pool at the resort when, seemingly out of nowhere, a man in his 30s approached him. To avoid being sued, I'm not going to give his full name, but the man's first name is David. So David starts playing pool with Max, and at first it seemed a little weird to Yvonne how friendly he was with him. But then again, it was a resort where everyone was pretty friendly, so it wasn't really a cause for concern. The man then started telling Max and the family about how he was also on vacation with his adoptive father, and they were celebrating the day that he was adopted so many years ago as a kid. The adoptive father is also named David, so from here on out, I'll address them as David Jr. and David Sr. So David Sr. then joins everyone and asks them what they had planned for the next day. Yvonne tells him that she and her family are going parasailing, and David Sr. asks if they can join them. So Yvonne, being nice, says yes. The next day came and went, and everyone had a good time together. They all went parasailing, and then David Jr. takes Max out on a couple of rented jet skis. They came back and Max said that he had fun, and that was that. They weren't really planning on hanging out with the 2 men again, but then the next day, as the family was hanging out by the pool, David Sr. approached them. He then asks Max in front of Yvonne if he wants to go jet skiing again. Yvonne tells him no because he just did it the day prior, but he insists, saying that he really wants Max to go and that he'd even pay for it. And Max, being a kid, was really excited and begged his mom to let him go. So Yvonne said yes, even though she really didn't want him to. The last time Max was ever seen alive was getting on a jet ski and following David Sr. out onto the water. And what happened after this has never really been explained. So the jet ski rental was only supposed to last 45 minutes, but over an hour goes by and Max and David Sr. are still not back yet. So Yvonne starts to worry and heads down to the beach, but to her surprise, there were already people trying to look for the 2 with binoculars. This is when things start to get strange. In a panic, Yvonne goes back to the resort and tells management that her son is missing, and he was last seen with this strange older man that's also staying at this resort. So management then goes to the men's room and starts knocking on the door in hopes of finding David Jr. inside, but nobody answers the door. So authorities were notified and a search and rescue boat was sent out to try and find them. In the distance, Yvonne could see the boat coming back, but mysteriously, only one person was brought back, and it was David Sr. Max was nowhere to be found. What's odd is that the entire time they were looking for the 2, David Jr. was mysteriously missing as well, and he only showed back up when his dad was being rescued and brought back to shore. When Yvonne asked him where he was because they were looking for him, he said that he was passed out drunk in his room and didn't hear anyone knocking. When David Sr. was brought back to shore, he was suspiciously covered in scratches all over his neck and arms. And when asked about what happened, his answer was truly disturbing. David Sr. said that he and Max went out to a sandbar a few miles away and decided to get off their jet skis. When they tried to leave, their jet skis wouldn't turn back on, so Max tied them together so they wouldn't float away. But as he was doing this, he said that he heard a loud thump, and when he looked around, he saw Max floating away. He said that that was the last time he ever saw Max, and he didn't try to help him or anything. Because of the scratches all over his body, the Aruban police brought him in for questioning, and his story started to not add up. David Sr. first told police that Max let go of the jet skis and started swimming to shore, but he then changed his story entirely. He then said that when he saw Max for the last time, he was just very calmly floating away, like he didn't even try to swim. David Sr. said that he tried calling out to Max, but he wasn't responding, although he said that his eyes were open. It was very obvious that he was lying and hiding something, so Yvonne asked authorities if they could check under his fingernails to see if they could find any DNA, or to possibly give him a lie detector test. But Aruban police told her no, that this isn't America and that they don't do stuff like that. When asked about how he got those scratches, David Sr. said that he got them from trying to climb back on the jet ski. But this doesn't really make sense because this wasn't his first time riding on a jet ski. He had done it before, and his entire neck and both of his arms were literally covered in scratches. That doesn't just happen by simply trying to get back on a jet ski. Even though this man was clearly hiding something, the police just let him go and pretty much believed every word he said. Although a massive search was launched by boat and air, Max was never found. Authorities said that Max was lost at sea and that this was all just a tragic accident, and they eventually stopped searching for him. There really wasn't much that Yvonne could do as authorities weren't helping her, so she and her daughter had to go back home without Max. One thing that really stood out to me though is that on the flight home, the two men were actually sitting behind Yvonne, and David Sr. said something that's honestly really sinister. He asked Yvonne if he could send her flowers on Max's anniversary. Who would say something like that? After this, Yvonne never saw those two men ever again. After going home, Yvonne did everything she could to try and get media attention for Max's disappearance, but this was quickly overshadowed by the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, who also went missing in Aruba just a year after Max, and news of her disappearance was everywhere. Like, you couldn't turn on a TV without hearing about it. Not too long after this, a local police detective near Yvonne's home in Michigan decided to take on Max's case. It didn't take him long while researching Max's story to immediately figure out that something horrible happened to him and that this wasn't just an accident. He started reviewing the statements given by David Sr. in Aruba and noticed how his story didn't add up, so he decided to run a background check on him, and what he found is horrifying. He found that David Sr. was arrested in 1981 for sexually abusing another 14-year-old boy, the same age as Max. But this wasn't just any random 14-year-old boy. It was his own adoptive son, David Jr., who was the one traveling with him in Aruba. This was a major red flag to the detective because if he was arrested for assaulting his son, why were they now still in contact and traveling together? So then he started going through David Jr.'s statements that he gave in Aruba, and he found that he lied about something major. He said that his dad had never been arrested, which obviously wasn't true because he had been a personal victim of his own dad, and he was arrested for it. Then he started oversharing a bunch of really odd information, saying how he's 100% hetero and has never done anything intimate with a boy or man. This was all voluntarily said by him, which is weird. This detective got the FBI to briefly investigate this case, and they actually brought David Jr. in for questioning. He of course denied having anything bad to do with Max's disappearance, and he stood on the fact that it was just a tragic accident. So the FBI offered him to take a polygraph test, in which he agreed, and he was scheduled to take it the following day. But not so shockingly, he never showed up. Eventually, the FBI were taken off the case to work on a bigger case, but they believed that the two men were working together to target other young boys. They believed that David Jr. was used to groom Max into creating a friendship bond, and then when David Sr. took Max out to the sandbar, he had a son meet him out there so that they could assault Max and kill him. And that's why David Sr. was covered in scratches, because Max fought for his life. Despite how obvious it was that Max was met with foul play, his case would soon go cold, and no movement would happen until April of 2016. One day, seemingly out of the blue, Yvonne gets a message from a woman asking to talk about Max. This woman doesn't want to be named publicly for fear of her safety, but she goes on to tell Yvonne that she dated David Jr. for a year. She said that she, David Jr., and his dad were all sitting in the living room when his dad suddenly blurted out, quote, "Hey, has he ever mentioned anything about the 14-year-old boy who went missing in Aruba?" End quote. The woman says no because David Jr. has never mentioned anything about it before, and his dad says that he was really close with the boy and that it hurt him a lot when he went missing. Later that night, the woman asked David Jr. what happened that day in Aruba, which made him incredibly mad. He yelled at her to never talk about him ever again. Apparently at this time, this woman had a son from a previous relationship, and she said that after this interaction, she started paying attention to how David Sr. would act around her son. She said that he got way too close to her son and always wanted him to sit on his lap. So this is when she left him, and she decided to Google missing 14-year-old boy in Aruba and found Max's story. She then reached out to Yvonne wanting to help. This is when Yvonne found yet another girl that this man dated, and she was able to talk to her as well. This woman said that on one occasion, David Jr. told her that the only good thing his father has ever done for him was get him out of trouble in Aruba. She said that David Jr. would sleep talk and say Max's name, and one night she confronted him about it, asking who Max was. He then snapped and held her at gunpoint, strangling and stabbing her, but somehow the woman was able to escape and survive the attack. David Jr. was arrested for this, but somehow he only ever got 2 years probation for literal attempted murder. It's now been 20 years, and Max has never been found. The two men have never been charged in connection to his case. Although the way I see it is that there are two people in this entire world who know exactly what happened to him. Max's mom is here on TikTok trying to get some focus back on his case, so please go follow her. Although what exactly happened to him 20 years ago remains a mystery, Max still deserves justice, and his case deserves to be reopened.
You know, when you kind of like start looking into something and wish you hadn't, that's how I feel about this McDonald's massacre. I was always like, why does nobody ever talk about this? And then I realized this guy was a very angry and bitter man. Don't let his smile fool you. His name is James Huberty, and he was just troubled from day one, honestly. His mum abandoned him to go and join some kind of religious group, and ever since then he just hated all humans. So it kind of made sense that when he grew up he would work in a funeral home with people who were all dead. Somehow, I don't really know how he managed to meet a woman and she liked him enough to marry him, and they ended up having 2 daughters together. But tragedy struck when their family home randomly burned to the ground in 1971, like total singed to the floor. It's not clear how or why it did, but one thing that the firemen did notice was that there was a really big singed collection of guns. Amongst all this chaos, James then ended up getting sacked from his job at the funeral home because he was just so unsympathetic towards bereaved relatives. The ATC briefly moved with his family to Mexico City and then to San Isidro, California. And he was just vile. I'd love to say that he changed and his family really helped him grow as a person. They didn't, and he didn't change. He was abusive to them, to his wife, to his kids. He was just a nasty piece of work. And they apparently had 2 family dogs, and these dogs ended up getting really aggressive. I wonder who they learned that from. And trigger warning for animals. At one point, the one dog was playing up, and so James took out a shotgun and shot the family dog. He was just becoming more and more violent, unhinged to everybody that he knew. His wife was getting more and more anxious and worried about his mental state, so she actually reached out to mental health services, but sadly, they didn't ring her back in time. On the 18th of July 1984, James and his family headed to McDonald's for breakfast before going to the zoo for the day. Zoo trip seemed to go fine, nothing amiss. They then got home and James got changed into some camouflage clothing, and his wife's like, "Where are you going?" With a grin on his face, laughing to himself, he said he was going to hunt humans. Now, his wife thought that this was like a weird, sick little joke, and she kind of just shrugged it off and let him get on with it. But it was not a joke. After eating at the restaurant hours earlier, James took a weapon into the building where there were mums, dads, brothers, sisters, babies, all eating. And all hell broke loose. He first gunned down a group of 3 11-year-old boys, like innocent boys that were just eating their lunch. Joshua Coleman was one of them who was shot, but actually he survived by playing dead. He was absolutely terrified and he was in excruciating pain, but he was thinking, if I just lie here, hopefully he'll walk away. Lucky for Joshua, he did. But it was unlucky for the rest of the people eating in that restaurant. He screamed, "I've killed thousands and I'll kill thousands more," and then just opened fire at everybody. Now, if you think about being trapped in a restaurant with a man wielding a gun, 7 minutes would have been agonizing. It would have felt like an eternity. This went on for 77 minutes. These blood-curdling screams were ringing out, the windows were shattering with the bullets. Disgustingly, he was just firing at everybody, showing no mercy, not even to a 4-month-old baby. Police raced to the scene and they really were struggling to think, like, how do we manage this situation without more people dying? A massive standoff began. James fired over 200 rounds of ammunition and killed 21 people. These were parents, grandparents, babies, toddlers. An 8-month-old baby died in this terror. Thank God the 4-month-old baby that I mentioned earlier actually did survive, as well as her parents. Thankfully, eventually, a police sniper shot James through the heart and he did not survive. Emergency services were wheeling dead bodies out of that restaurant for what felt like days. Families just had to try and make sense of this senseless tragedy, including James's own family. Now, I'm really conflicted about this because his poor daughters weren't allowed back to their own school because of it upsetting the victims, which I totally understand, by the way. The daughters were traumatized too. They hated their dad for what he'd done. Like, they couldn't process this. They were really traumatized. Their lives were then destroyed by his actions. They had to move schools and change identity. Let me know what you think in the comments. And for more cases like this, I post a brand new episode on my podcast, The Born Investigation, every single week.
This OnlyFans model lured a man deep into the woods and executed him. But was this a cold-blooded killing and an act of revenge, or was it self-defense? Comment down below and let me know what you think. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Matthew Dunmeyer. In March 2021, 31-year-old Matthew was rounding off a long week at work by having a couple drinks with some of his co-workers inside of a local bar in Hudson, Ohio. Matthew was a very well-liked man. He was in a long-term relationship and was a father of 2. He was an aspiring musician who was very gifted at the guitar. He was described as a great friend, a helping hand, the type of person who was always there for you whenever they needed them with a smile on his face. Before moving to Ohio, Matthew was actually from Virginia, and this is where he went to high school, and that is where he met Chelsea Perkins. The two weren't exactly friends, but they did share a lot of mutual friends and kind of went round in the same circles, so they weren't strangers. They definitely knew one another. After graduating from high school, Chelsea opted for a career in the Coast Guard, and she absolutely flourished here. She was said to have had a stellar career and was dedicated to her job. While serving, she would meet her partner, who quickly turned into her husband and the father of her 2 children. After leaving the Coast Guard service, Chelsea did a complete 180 and she decided to begin a career within adult entertainment. Under the stage name Selena Savage, she would star in several adult entertainment movies and eventually became a very successful alternative OnlyFans model, opening up her own account. Despite how happy both of these individuals looked with how their lives were going, they were going about their lives normally, Chelsea held a rage and resentment against Matthew. In 2017, Chelsea would make a report to the police claiming that Matthew had raped her. Officers investigated this allegation and they decided that there wasn't enough evidence to pursue anything, and so nothing further was done. Friends of Matthew would describe him as being absolutely mortified and horrified at these allegations, and he always said that any sexual activity between the two was always consensual. After high school, they both went their separate ways and didn't see each other or speak to one another again until 2021, when Matthew got an unexpected message through Facebook. Chelsea had reached out to him after all of these years, and the two started chatting, catching up and reminiscing. Eerily, on the day that she reached out to Matthew, she also posted a status saying, quote, "Dead man tell no tales." They would chat back and forth with one another for a couple of weeks, and despite both of them being in happy long-term relationships, they decided to meet up. Chelsea would drive over 300 miles from her home in Virginia to Ohio in her husband's car to pick up Matthew. On that evening, he would tell his co-workers in the bar that he was going to be meeting this woman that he had been speaking to online, despite having the girlfriend and 2 children sat back at home. They would watch Matthew check his phone and see a message from Chelsea telling him that she was there. They waved him off as he walked out of the bar, and that would be the final time that they ever saw their friend alive. The two would spend that night in an Airbnb that Chelsea had booked, and during his time there, Matthew would actually text his girlfriend saying, quote, "I just spent the night sleeping with someone else, but you must not love me. I pissed her off multiple times now, and that's your fault too. Hope you're happy over there with our kids." The following morning, now the 6th of March 2021, they would climb back into Chelsea's husband's car and drove to the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. They would go on a hike going through a popular trail, passing by a cemetery before eventually getting to a secluded wooded area. Shortly before midday, other hikers in that national park would recall hearing a single gunshot sound racing through the trees. Chelsea had shot Matthew in the back of the head, execution style, killing him instantly. After committing the murder completely unshaken, Chelsea just went about her normal life. In fact, that very day, she got back into the car and then went and got a tattoo of a noose. Matthew's body wouldn't be discovered until days later by other hikers. His identification was quickly figured out and the FBI took over the investigation, determined to track down the killer. Which actually wasn't that hard. Chelsea had pretty much left a trail behind. Through CCTV, phone data and DNA, they were able to narrow down their suspect pool to one person, and that was Chelsea Perkins. A search warrant would be conducted inside of Chelsea's house, and inside of her handbag they recovered a gun. The same caliber that they believed was used to kill Matthew, and they also found his photo ID. It didn't take long for all the ballistics to match up, and in fact, Matthew's DNA was found on the gun. So this means that Chelsea either had the weapon pointed directly on his head, or during the time that they were together, he took hold of it at some point. Chelsea Perkins would be arrested and charged with murder, which she completely denied. She stated that this was an act of self-defense after what he had done to her in 2017. Despite this denial, however, only days before her trial was set to begin, she would plead guilty to the second-degree murder of Matthew Dunmeyer and was handed a sentence of 22.5 years to serve.
A family massacred on Halloween. This is a terrifying Halloween true crime case and a Halloween that changed the Lisk family forever. Billy Lisk and his son Billy Jr., who also went by BJ, but we're gonna call William in this video, lived in Columbus, Ohio. William was a very angry child. He was always causing problems at school. He was causing fights. He was honestly a huge bully at school. But his father always hoped that one day his son would just grow out of it. But William did not. His behavior and anger only got worse as he got older. In 2001, when William was 15 years old, his father remarried a woman named Susan, and this was supposed to be all of their happily ever after. But William hated his stepmom. He hated his stepbrothers, Devin and Derek. He hated their rules. He hated the fact that they went to church. It's normal for children to react negatively when their parents remarry. It's weird having someone come into your home and change everything. But the hate that William had for his stepmother was far different. In 2004, when William was 18 years old, he hit his stepmother Susan really hard in the stomach, and he was arrested for assault. And then only 2 months later, he bashed her over the head with a mug and stole her car. Susan tried to press charges against her stepson William, but he was actually deemed unfit to stand trial, and he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. So he was removed from his house and placed in a group home for the mentally ill. And obviously, this is really hard on Billy. I mean, he loves his son. He doesn't want to just give up on him, lock him up and throw away the key. He would try to bring him home sometimes, but then there was an incident where his wife was taking a shower and his son came in while his wife was in the shower and tried to attack her. So once again, William was removed from the home. At this point, William was still being treated for his mental health, and he was seeing a therapist, and his therapist actually deemed him a danger to himself and others. So William, who is an adult now, was involuntarily admitted into a hospital. But once again, his father, Billy, just couldn't stand the idea of his son being locked up forever, and honestly, that's kind of what it was looking like. So Billy applied for legal guardianship over his adult son, William. He put him in like a halfway house kind of thing, so his son would still have freedom, kind of a normal life, but he would still be away from his wife and his stepchildren, who were honestly really terrified of William. And to try and keep the peace between his son and his wife, Billy would often take weekend trips with his son, William. So, he could still spend time with his son, but he was still limiting the amount of time that his family was together. And that's exactly what the father and son duo, Billy and William, did on Halloween weekend 2010. They went to their family cabin to go hunting, and they did go hunting a little bit. They were hunting deer, but honestly, they were just talking a lot, and especially about William's issues. And the morning after their weekend trip was Halloween. 16-year-old Devin Griffin, who was the stepbrother to William, returned home that morning around 9:30. He had spent the previous night at his biological father's house. He returned home, but he wasn't going to be there long. He was actually running late. He had to rush inside and change his clothes because he was
meant to be at church that morning because he was a part of the church choir. And as Devin was trying to rush out the door, he runs into his stepbrother William, and this was really odd for multiple reasons. One, William was like never over at their house anymore, and two, he didn't seem his normal self. William is usually this really gloomy person, but he seemed really happy. And then his stepbrother starts asking him a bunch of questions. Where are you going? When will you be back? And this was weird because they didn't get along. They didn't like talk like that. When 16-year-old Devin Griffin returned home from church, he realized that the house was quiet, but he just went upstairs to play video games. He's 16, it's a Sunday afternoon. He played video games for so long. He played video games for hours until it was dark outside. And then he went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and then he realized that the house was still quiet, but it was too quiet, and this was weird. So he went into the bedroom of his mother and his stepfather and was really confused to see that they're still laying in bed and they had the blanket over their head. He starts calling out to them like, "Hey, sleepyheads, wake up. What are you guys doing?" He goes over and tries to like push his mom awake. But then when that doesn't work, he lifts the cover over her head and then notices that there's blood everywhere. His first thought was, this is some sick Halloween prank, but it wasn't. This was very real. The 16-year-old boy who has just found his mother and stepfather dead in their beds runs outside. He calls his aunt, and his aunt calls 911. When the police arrived, they discovered a terrible scene. Billy had been shot 5 times in the face, and his wife Susan had been shot 3 times in the head, but had also been SA'd after she was killed. And Susan's other son, Derek, was also found dead in his bed. It seemed like all of them had been killed in their sleep. And my heart really breaks for Devin for so many reasons. Like, he was the one to have found his mother and his stepfather, but then he had to realize that when he not only came home, you know, that morning before church, his family was already dead then. And then they were also dead while he played video games in his room for hours with their bodies in the same house. It did not take them long to find William. He was back at his family's cabin that he was just at hours earlier with his father for that, you know, father-son trip. And William was arrested at 24 years old for killing his father, killing his stepmother, and also essaying his stepmother after death, the stepmother that he always hated, and also for killing his stepbrother. He made a full confession to avoid the death penalty. Guess that weekend hunting with his father went really great. Billy thought that his son William was doing so much better that he wanted to take his son home so he could show his wife how much better his son was doing on his medicine and seeing therapy and in this halfway house that they had put him in. And apparently the time that William, Billy, and Susan spent together that night went so well that they offered William to spend the night, which was apparently something they never did. It was like against their rules. And at some point while everyone slept, William just got up and killed everybody. William was sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. While he was being sentenced, he apologized, said that he felt really bad, and he apparently seemed really upset, and he blamed his actions on his mental health. Only a few years later, in March of 2015, he unalived himself in prison at the age of 29 years old. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much for spending some of your Halloween with me. Happy Halloween. If you guys are doing anything tonight, please stay safe. Eat some candy for me. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another video.
She would disappear after attending a Halloween party, and to this very day, she has never been found. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the disappearance of Cindy Song. Hyun Jung Song was born in February 1980 in South Korea, and growing up, she was described as a very gifted child. She was exceptionally smart. Hyun had a very keen interest in America and the United States, and just like so many people when they're young, she dreamed of moving over there to experience the lifestyle and the culture and everything that the United States had to offer. Lucky for Hyun, she had relatives living in Virginia, and so when she was only 15 years old, she decided to make the leap, moving from South Korea over to the United States. This is when she would adopt the name Cindy. Cindy quickly settled in. She attended high school where she got really good grades and then would eventually be accepted into Penn State University. Her friends would describe her as bubbly, likable, responsible. She was very hardworking. Alongside maintaining her very good grades, she also worked 2 jobs. One of her part-time jobs, she worked as a waitress, and the other she worked inside of the Penn State Library. She did all this while still being able to maintain a social life. She was really interested in the creative industry, so whether it be art or writing poems or photography or watching movies, Cindy was all over it. Alongside having her girlfriends, she was also in a very committed and serious relationship with a man named Richard. They actually lived together off of campus. However, in September 2001, completely out of nowhere, Richard would break up with Cindy, and this absolutely devastated her. He broke her heart. But with the help of her friends and her therapist, Cindy soon started to feel better. On Halloween night in 2001, 21-year-old Cindy and her two friends, Lisa and Stacy, all got dressed up and decided to go and hit the bars. Cindy got dressed up as a bunny, but it wasn't a sexy, like, Playboy bunny by any means. It was described as being a cute bunny, which was very on brand for Cindy. They had the time of their lives inside of this bar. They were drinking, laughing, dancing and singing all up until 2 a.m. when they decided to call it a night. They all went to another friend's home where they sat and played video games till just before 4 a.m. This is when Cindy decided that she was ready to go home. Stacy offered her a lift and dropped her off at her apartment. Stacy would watch Cindy walk up the steps towards her apartment, but didn't actually watch Cindy go inside of her home. As Cindy turned around, smiled, waving at her friend, Stacy had no idea that that would be the last time she would see Cindy alive. After a couple of days passed, it's now the 4th of November, friends of Cindy began growing very concerned because they hadn't heard from her since they all went out on Halloween night. By this point, she had missed 2 days of work and 2 days of university, which was so unlike Cindy. She would never do that. And they couldn't recall Cindy saying that she had anything pre-planned as to why she would miss these. They all decided to head over to her apartment, see what was going on, but when they knocked on the door and she didn't answer, they decided to contact the police. When police made entry into the apartment, Cindy was nowhere to be seen. They could see that there was no sign of a struggle, so no one had broken into the apartment, no one had followed Cindy into the apartment and then dragged her back out. It looked like she had just left of her own accord. We know that she did go back in her apartment because her false eyelashes that she was wearing that night were found on the side of the sink, and her backpack was there too. What was weird though was that her phone was in her backpack, and Cindy would never usually leave her phone behind. Not found in the apartment was the clothes she was wearing that evening. So this sort of told the officers that she disappeared on that Halloween night. What was missing from the apartment, however, was her driving license and her credit cards. So wherever she had gone, she had taken those, but not her phone, which was really strange. Cindy's friends would actually say that it wouldn't be uncommon for Cindy to pop out to a 24-hour shop, which was just over the road, kind of along the street. So maybe that's what she had done, but by all means, it looked like she intended to come back home. The idea that Cindy could have potentially ended her own life was thrown out there. However, everyone that knew her completely said that there was no chance that Cindy would have done that. She had no reason to. Yes, she had just gone through this awful breakup, but she was healing, she was coming out of the other side, and she had so much to look forward to. She was making plans. For example, she had a Britney Spears concert to look forward to, and she had also recently ordered a new computer, which was due to be delivered to her. These weren't things that made people think that she was going to end her own life. She was definitely going to continue her life. Although I do appreciate that for some people who end their own life, there are no signs and it does just happen. However, Cindy's close one said that this was completely not the case for her. After learning about the disappearance, Cindy's parents flew from South Korea to the US to aid in the search, and when they got to her apartment, they meticulously cleaned it unknowingly and unintentionally potentially wiping away evidence. Officers would conduct searches throughout the community and throughout the local wooded areas. However, all of the searches turned up nothing. Very quickly, the investigation into Cindy's disappearance began to grow cold. That is until police got a terrifying tip. A woman in Philadelphia, so over 200 miles away from Cindy's apartment, would contact the police telling them that she thought she had seen Cindy. She was in the Chinatown region of Philadelphia when a car was driving past. A woman inside the car who matched Cindy's description was screaming, crying out for help before a man who was also sat in the car shut her up. This woman worked with police to come up with this composite sketch of that man, but he has never came forward and he has never been identified. And we have no idea if that was actually Cindy. To this day, Cindy's song is still missing and investigators have no idea what happened to her after that Halloween night. There have been many theories throughout the years, so comment down below and let me know what you think.
The teacher that was having an affair with a 15-year-old student and then convinced him to kill her husband. The case of Pamela Smart is a woozy, and you're gonna feel like I'm telling you the plot of a Lifetime movie. Pamela met Greg Smart in 1986 while she was in college, and Pamela liked Greg because she thought that he looked like a rock star. After Pamela graduated college, the couple moved to New Hampshire, they bought a condo, they got a dog, and they married in May of 1989. People thought that they were the perfect couple, but after only being married for a few months, Greg confessed to his wife that he had been unfaithful. Pamela says that the news devastated her, but she was determined to make their marriage work, and she became an almost workaholic to distract herself. Pamela was a media director for the local high school, and because Pamela was young, she was only 22 years old, she was pretty, she was really into rock music and metal music, the students really liked Pamela, and Pamela really liked the students back. On May 1st, 1990, which would have been almost Pamela and Greg's first wedding anniversary, Pamela Smart came home from a board meeting at the high school and found her husband, 24-year-old Greg Smart, lying dead on the floor of their condo. Pamela was hysterical. She ran to a neighbor for help, and that neighbor called 911. When police arrived, at first they thought that the scene was like a robbery gone wrong, but when they looked a little bit closer, they realized that the scene had been staged. There was no forced entry, there was no sign of a struggle, and there were a lot of valuable items and Greg's wallet that hadn't been stolen. And Greg's now widow, Pamela, was not acting the way you would expect a woman who just came home and found her husband dead to be acting. She wasn't showing a lot of emotion, and she was rubbing people the wrong way with some of the comments that she was making. Like when she was given a TV interview to talk about her husband's death, she mentioned to the people that were working at the news station that she always wanted to be on TV. But Pamela Smart had a rock-solid alibi. She was at that meeting at school, and a lot of people saw her there. But the investigators still felt like she had been involved. And then investigators got some information that absolutely broke the case. An anonymous caller said that some of the boys, the students at the high school that Pamela worked at, were telling people that they were involved in Greg's murder. They were almost bragging about it. And one of those boys had actually been sleeping with Pamela. The anonymous caller also said that a girl named Celia Pierce knows everything before hanging up. So I'm gonna back up a little bit. We're gonna rewind a little bit to before Greg's murder. So Pamela, she's working at this high school. She's 22 years old. She's super young. She's outgoing. She's cool, easy, breezy, beautiful, all that jazz. Pamela was allowed to choose one student intern, and that was 15-year-old Celia Pierce. All of the students liked Pamela. They always wanted to hang out in her office and talk to her. But Pamela, who's an adult, working at the high school, did not understand appropriate boundaries. The 22-year-old Pamela and her student intern, the 15-year-old Celia Pierce, would call each other's best friend, which in itself is already so wildly inappropriate, but to make it worse, the two of them would be hanging out outside school all the time. But this was not the only student that Pamela was hanging out with, because she was having an affair with the 15-year-old Billy Flynn. And I chose to use the quotations around affair because this is a predatory relationship. Obviously, Billy is in high school, he is a minor, he's 15 years old, and Pamela is in a position of power working at the high school. The 22-year-old Pamela and the 15-year-old Billy began their relationship in the late 1989, early 1990. Billy had never even slept with anyone before, and now here's this beautiful, smart, older woman that likes him. And she would tell him that her husband was a lousy cheater, that he was abusive, that she was so unhappy in the marriage, but if she divorced him, that he would take everything from her. After Pamela slept with Billy for the first time, his first time ever, Billy says that the next morning, Pamela tried to break up with him. She said that they couldn't be together anymore. Her husband would find out, he would divorce her, take everything, and if Billy wanted to be with her, then he would need to get rid of her husband. And then they started planning how they would get rid of Greg Smart, Pamela's husband. On May 1st, 1990, while Pamela was at that board meeting, the perfect alibi, 2 of Billy's friends, Vance and Raymond, were tasked with driving the getaway car, while Billy and his 16-year-old friend, Patrick Randall, waited inside of Pamela and Greg's condo for Greg to get home from work. When Greg walked through the door, Patrick and Billy rushed him. They got him on his knees. Patrick held a weapon up to his throat while Billy was behind him with another weapon and pulled the trigger. So after investigators got that tip that they should go talk to Pamela's student intern Celia, they went to talk to her and she immediately folded and told them everything. They also agreed as Pamela's best friend to get wired up and record Pamela's confession. And they were able to record Pamela making it very clear that she was aware of her husband's murder beforehand, and also Pamela trying to pressure Celia to lie for her. So with this information, a detective went to go confront Pamela. He told Pamela, "I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that I have solved your husband's murder, and the bad news is you are under arrest." Pamela denied any involvement, but all of her underage minor co-conspirators, they made a confession and they agreed to turn against Pamela, testify against her for a plea deal and a lighter sentence. There was so much media attention on this case. Everyone was talking about it. It was like the big news at the time because nothing had ever happened like this before, at least that like the general public knew about. What I find really weird, but I believe is probably just a product of the time because this was 1990, Pamela was never charged with statutory SA of Billy, and the media really portrayed her as more of like a promiscuous girl rather than a predator, and they really played up this like hot teacher angle. And because she was really into like rock music and metal music, whenever they would like talk about her on the news and show photos of her, they would play the song Hot for Teacher, which is so disgusting and inappropriate. And when it was time for Pamela Smart's trial, it was the first murder trial ever to be televised. And it's actually been said to be like the first thing that like really sparked people's interest in true crime. Pamela Smart's trial was the hottest ticket in town. People were camping out all night to get a seat. During her trial, she continued to claim that she was innocent and all of the children testified against her. And something that came out during the trial that I really wanted to add, I think it's really going to speak to Greg's character as a person. When Billy and Patrick had him on his knees, they attempted to rob him before taking his life, and they asked him to take off his wedding ring, and Greg told them that he couldn't give him the wedding ring because his wife would kill him. Pamela Smart was found guilty and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole at the age of 23 years old. Billy and Patrick were sentenced to life with the possibility of parole with good behavior, and the boys in the getaway car van was sentenced to 18 years to life, and Raymond was sentenced to 15 to 30 years. Raymond was released in 2003, and then 2 years after that, Van was released in 2005. And then Billy and Patrick were both released in 2015, and remember, Billy is actually the one that pulled the trigger and ended Greg's life. So all of those boys are out today. Pamela Smart has been in prison for 34 years now. She's in her 50s, and she has continued to deny any involvement. She says that she's innocent. She did not know that her husband was going to be killed. She said that Billy killed her husband because he wanted to be with her. But in this past July, she did come out and say that she does take responsibility for having an affair with Billy and then him killing her husband. And there are some people that do believe that Pamela is innocent, that Billy was the one to do this, and then he and his friends just blamed her so they could get a lighter sentence. And people have also noted that Celia, the student intern, ended up making like $100,000 selling this story to like a movie, so she had reason to lie, like financial gain. But if you're looking for my opinion, I 100% believe that Pamela is guilty as sin, but let me know what you think in the comments. While you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another video.
The most gut-wrenching case, because the amount of people that failed this baby is unfathomable. That being said, I do have to give a big warning. This case is extremely hard to listen to, and we are talking about children, so if you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, shape, or form, please skip this video, and I will see you in my next one. I mean it. I love you. Anthony Avalos was born to his parents, Heather and Victor, in California. His dad ended up returning to Mexico, where he was from, so there really wasn't a relationship between them. And his mom, Heather, she was a teenager when she had Anthony, and she goes on to have 6 more children. every single one of her kids were what she would describe as accidents, and she treated them as such. She's been described to be a very impatient, angry person who did not give her children the care they very much needed. Heather worked at a restaurant while Anthony was growing up, and oftentimes she would leave him with her dad while she was at work, and her dad sucked. When Anthony was only 4 years old, DCFS, the Department of Child and Family Services, was called by a different family member to report the way Anthony was being treated by Heather's dad. DCFS was notified of potential essay going on against Anthony at the hands of his grandpa, and caseworkers were sent out to see what was going on. DCFS determined that essay had taken place, but instead of taking any further action, all they really did was tell Heather to stop leaving Anthony at her father's house. They also advised her to take Anthony to go and see a counselor to discuss what had happened to him. Heather told the caseworker, yes, absolutely sounds good. I will stop leaving Anthony with my father and I'll go take him to see a counselor. But did she ever? Of course not. From that point on, in early 2013 to December of 2014, DCFS would become a constant in Anthony's life. The family received weekly visits from caseworkers that would go out to the house because there were constant calls by family members, teachers, or counselors, etc., expressing their concerns regarding Anthony. Yet for some reason, things would only get worse for Anthony. In 2014, when he was 6 years old, DCFS visited his home after a family member of Heather's confided in her therapist about how she was worried for his safety. Not only his safety, but also the safety of Heather's other children. This family member told her therapist that she knew that some of the punishments Heather did when her children misbehaved included locking them away in a room for hours at a time, withholding food and water from them, and forcing them to crouch down for hours while holding heavy objects. That caused yet another investigation to be opened and prompted another caseworker to go out to Heather's house to go and check on the children. During that visit, the caseworker noted that the house was extremely filthy, meaning that the kids were living in poor sanitary conditions. They also noted that it did in fact look like the kids were malnourished. And after talking to 6-year-old Anthony, they got direct confirmation from him that yes, Heather not only neglected him and his siblings to a dangerous degree, but she also punished them severely all the time for all kinds of things. Still, however, the situation was considered to be low risk, and although DCFS kept the investigation open, the kids were still allowed to remain in Heather's care. It was suggested that Heather signed up for a voluntary family maintenance program after she told the caseworker that she was feeling extremely overwhelmed attempting to take care of all of her children without any help. While she was enrolled in the program, caseworkers and counselors that worked with her then also noticed that she seemed to have so much resentment towards her children. One of them even describing Heather as hateful towards her own children, and on top of that saying that she was unfit to take care of anyone because she had mental health issues of her own that she needed help for. It took a while, but eventually Heather agreed to accept in-house counseling, meaning that counselors would go out to her house to assess the situation, to speak to the children, to ensure that they were okay, and make sure that the situation was improving. Those counselors saw with their own 2 eyes just how impatient Heather was. They saw her constantly yelling at the kids, mistreating them, and experiencing emotional outbursts. And when the counselors would point this out, Heather would say, yeah, I'm definitely in the wrong. I'm not a great mom, but I'm just trying my best. Those counselors were not a part of DCFS directly. They were part of a different organization that would be hired by them for this program that was meant to help families out. But when they attempted to get in touch with DCFS to report their findings, more oftentimes than not, their phone calls would go ignored. And when they would get through to DCFS, they would be told that Heather was just trying her best and to, quote, not worry too much about it, end quote. It got to the point that counselors from that organization felt like they were not being taken seriously, and they reached out to an emergency hotline on more than one occasion to report not only Heather but also DCFS because of their lack of concern. But shortly after those calls, those counselors were removed by DCFS from the case, and not long after, the case was closed altogether. And one of the many alarming things of this entire situation is that so many people reported that they saw Heather with their own eyes be awful to her children. And if that's the way that she was acting in front of counselors and caseworkers and family members and teachers, imagine the way that she acted behind closed doors when there was no one around to defend the kids. It's terrifying and so concerning. And on a different note, even though Heather seemed to hate every single one of her kids, she did want them to be in her care. Why? Because she was receiving financial assistance from the government. She was getting welfare checks for the kids, so she wanted to keep them, and more kids for her meant more money. In 2015, Heather met Kareem Liaiva, who was a co-worker of her brother's, who was the person that introduced them. They started seeing each other and eventually started dating. And after Kareem came into their lives, poor little Anthony did not stand a chance. Things only went from bad to worse because Heather now had a boyfriend that was just as bad as her, if not worse. Kareem had children of his own with at least 2 separate women, and those women had restraining orders against him because he was that dangerous and that awful to his own children. Shortly after Heather and Kareem began dating, one of Heather's exes, that was the father to one of Anthony's half-brothers, called the emergency hotline to report that he had just seen his son and he was covered in bruises and injuries. He called to report that he was concerned about the way that Heather was treating their son. That made it onto the desk of a social worker who then called to report it to DCFS. But when she called, she stated that even though she did see marks on Anthony's half-brother Angel, she had no real concern and said she was only calling to, quote, cover their butts, end quote. Anthony, along with his siblings, was a student at Lincoln Elementary School, and in September of 2015, he spoke to the vice principal and confided in her about the way that he was being treated at home. Specifically, he said that his mother Heather would mistreat not only him but also his siblings. He said that she would lock them in a room for long periods of time with no access to food, no access to water, no access to the bathroom. He talked about the different punishments and the things that his mom would use for them. Those things were such as ping pong paddles and or belts. And around this time as well, Anthony confided in his uncle and told him and his wife about what was really going on at home. Anthony told his uncle that Kareem, Heather's boyfriend, would often dangle him upside down from a staircase, would force him to hold a squatting position for hours while holding books or bricks over his head, and would sometimes, quote, drop them on their heads, end quote. And remember, even though Anthony was a baby himself, he was the oldest out of Heather's 7 children, so I can imagine him trying to step up, trying to be a good older brother, even though he was so little himself, begging his aunt and uncle to please listen to him and to please help him. Both the vice principal and his uncle were horrified about what they were being told, and they called the emergency hotline again to report it all. For a few days, Anthony and his siblings were sent to the uncle's house to be kept away from Heather, but eventually Heather showed up to go and pick them up and take them back to her house. When she showed up, her brother, Anthony's uncle, and his wife did everything they could to physically block her from coming inside of the house to stop her from taking the children, and Heather threw a fit, to the point where the police had to be called. And when officers showed up, yet again, Anthony and his siblings told him all about how terrible Heather was and told them that Kareem was also awful. The kids told the officer that Kareem would drag them by their ears, push them against walls, force them to wrestle each other, and eat food from the trash can. The officer refused to let Heather take the kids, and he ordered that they stay with Anthony's uncle. That officer then called DCFS again, and when caseworkers showed up to the uncle's house to talk to him, Anthony told them, quote, Heather is my old mom. I am part of this family now. I will never see Heather again. She locks us in rooms and makes us starve, end quote. Yet for whatever reason, the kids were eventually sent back to live with Heather again, and by the end of 2015, when caseworkers checked in on Anthony, he told them that he had lied and that Heather and Kareem were great parents. And with that, ignoring everything the officer said, the uncle said, the vice president, and Anthony had previously said, DCFS closed the case. Only one last call would be made in 2016. That would lead to the sheriff's office opening up their own investigation that would later be closed with no resolution. And Anthony Avalos would remain in Heather and Kareem's care through 2018 before he would pass away. By early 2017, Heather had completely cut off ties with all of her family members. She had also enrolled Anthony and his siblings into a different school, leaving little Anthony feeling like he had nobody to turn to. But being in a new school meant that Anthony had new teachers, and one of his new teachers there, his 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Bell, would later testify as a witness in his trial. Mrs. Bell described Anthony to be, quote, everybody's best friend, end quote, and she remembers him being, quote, bubbly, always happy, and a joy to be around, end quote. According to her, she was completely unaware to what his home life was really like, but reading a letter that Anthony left her on the last day of school after learning everything that we know now broke her heart. The letter he wrote her reads, quote, Dear Mrs. Bell, thank you for teaching me everything you could. It was such a blessing to meet you. I just hope that when I'm going to 6th grade, you can come to New Vista so I can see you still. I hope that you can come to my high school, middle school, and college. That way we'll see each other for school years without a problem, because how close we are and how we are best buddies, friends. I just want to stay with you forever, but I can't. I just hope that you have a good rest of your life, because you already know that I'm going to have a good life. Love, Anthony Avalos, your friend, end quote. And it makes me so sad to say that when Anthony left school to go home for the summer, he would never return again. In the early summer of June 2018, according to Heather, Anthony approached her and told her that he might like boys and girls, and according to her, Kareem overheard that and he completely lost it on Anthony. Kareem grabbed Anthony, picked him up by his ankles, dropping him on his head over and over again. He poured hot sauce all over his face and into his eyes. He used belts and cords to harm him and withheld food and water for him. He did this to him, amongst other things, for the next 5 days. The morning of June 19th, Anthony woke up and told his mother that he felt weird. Heather told him that she would take him to the hospital, but according
according to her, Anthony just asked if he could just stay in bed and go back to sleep. He took himself to bed, and when Heather went to go check on him hours later, he was unresponsive. Anthony not responding only made Kareem even angrier, and he forcefully picked him up by his armpits and dropped him on his head at least 10 times. Kareem then walked away, leaving him to rest. The next morning, Anthony's little sister went to go check on him, and she later testified that he was not waking up and that his body was stiff as a board. Heather then put water on his face to attempt to wake him up, but when he didn't wake up, she tried to pick him up but couldn't because of how stiff his body was. According to his little sister, Heather's demeanor then changed and she started acting really nervous. She then eventually called 911 to report that her son was not breathing. The EMTs that arrived on the scene said that by the time that they showed up, Anthony had no pulse and he was not breathing. He was covered in injuries and so malnourished that his ribs were visible through his skin. He was also so severely dehydrated that his kidneys had started to shut down. 10-year-old little Anthony was rushed to the hospital and put on a ventilator, but despite doctors' best efforts, they were unable to bring him back. Anthony Avalos passed away on June 21st of 2018 at only 10 years old. Immediately after, the rest of his siblings were removed from Heather and Kareem's care, and they told authorities everything about how they were treated at home. Heather Barron and Kareem Leiva were arrested in June 2018 in connection to Anthony Avalos' death, and their trial began in January of 2023. On April 25th of 2023, they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But get this, out of all the people involved in this, out of all the caseworkers and the counselors that failed to put a stop to Heather and Kareem, out of all of them, not a single one lost their job. Not a single one was fired as a result of this case, which is literally revolting. One of the paramedics who had been a paramedic for 9 years who testified at Anthony's trial said she still often thinks about Anthony and everything that he went through. This is a quote from her in regards to Heather and Kareem, quote, "Of all the trauma, tragedy, and death I've ever seen or heard of, this surpasses them all. It may seem counterintuitive as someone who rushes to save lives to publicly wish death on another human. I actually wish the opposite for you both. I would hope that you are both made to feel alone, tormented, neglected, scared, confused, unwanted, unsafe, disgusting, useless, hated, lost, unloved, and every single horrible emotion you inflicted on Anthony and even more. Death would only end those feelings for you," end quote. Anthony's extended family members filed a lawsuit on claims that multiple social workers failed to respond to reports of Anthony and his siblings, and for that, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors formally approved a settlement of $32 million, which is honestly the least they could have done. It is devastating because how many times does this need to happen for something to actually change? And if you guys have ever heard of the Gabriel Fernandez case, some of the people that were involved in his case that also failed him over and over again were the same exact people involved in this case. It's heartbreaking and unbelievable. But that is all I have for this case. Let me know your thoughts on this. I know this is going to make you so angry, which it should. But yeah, that is all I have for today's video. Thank you guys for spending time with me today and for listening to Anthony's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is the story of Garika Gordon. We are in the UK today. 28-year-old Phoenix Nets was born in South London. In 2009, she made a bold move, moving out of her parents' house to pursue a dream of becoming a paramedic, something that she always wanted to do. She always loved to help people. She enrolled in Canterbury Christian Church University in Kent, but somewhere between her first and second year, depression hit. It became too much for her, so she ended up dropping out. After leaving Kent, she traveled northwest to Birmingham, which was uncommon for somebody who was from South London. But Birmingham was calling her name. She wanted to get back on her feet, start a new life. But by late 2019, she had lost her footing again. And I read somewhere that she might have been victim of substance abuse here and there. By early 2020, she had found herself living in a women's only refuge in West Birmingham. Now, this place took in a small amount of women who were just down on their luck at that time in their life. And everybody had their own room, but they shared a bathroom and they shared a kitchen. This is also where Garika Gordon lived. Garika had arrived at the refuge just a few weeks earlier than Phoenix. She was born in Jamaica, but at the age of 7, she was forced to live with her aunt
in England. She attended an all-girls school in North London, but by her late teens, she had got entangled with an older man who was forcing her to do sex work. He was also very abusive. In her mid to late 20s, she was diagnosed with personality disorder. But I read that her personality disorder was characterized by low frustration tolerance and intense volatile reaction to rejection. Remember that. By 2020, Garika had escaped London and started rebuilding her life in Birmingham. This is how she ended up at the refuge house. Now, her and Phoenix would first exchange, just highs when they walking past each other or seeing each other in the kitchen. Over time, the conversations got longer and a friendship was forming. But by February, something shifted. Phoenix started texting her friends saying something felt off with Garika. On one occasion, Garika asked Phoenix for sex, and Phoenix, still trying to be nice, but also set the boundary, told her no, that she was not into that. But Garika didn't take no for an answer. She started to get more aggressive. On another occasion, Phoenix had asked Garika for some money, and Garika agreed only in exchange for sex. When Phoenix declined again, Garika started to push her and hem her up. After that incident, Garika slid a note under Phoenix's door saying, "I know it's not like you to have sex, but I can't give you what you want unless we fuck." Garika, good Lord. On April 7th, 2020, Phoenix was texting her friend telling her, "I'm moving back to London because it's this girl here that keep hounding me for sex. I'm scared," which was her plan all along, but it's 2020. In the midst of COVID, England was on lockdown. So Phoenix had been ready to go back home, been ready to move. But it was restrictions during that time. You had to be in at a certain time and all that stuff was going on. So she couldn't pack up and move like she wanted to. So it was almost like she was stuck. On April 16th, Phoenix told Garika, as soon as these restrictions let up, "I'm out of here. I'm going back to South London." But Garika was not letting that happen. That same night, after Phoenix had just got off the phone with her friend, Garika entered her room. Now, it's unclear what was said, but she stabbed Phoenix 4 times, but the stab wounds weren't fatal. She trapped Phoenix in that room, took her phone, and let her bleed out for hours and hours. I think the medical examiner said that she was alive for 12 hours after she was stabbed. From 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., Garika made frantic Google searches from Phoenix's phone. How to fix a punctured lung, internal bleeding, can someone survive from a stab wound, waste disposal, circular saw for sale near me. Because how was you gonna fix the wound, Garika? Garika got the saw delivered around 11 a.m. on the 17th. She dismembered Phoenix's body into 6 different pieces. She then broke her room all the way down and called the disposal people to come get her bed, carpet, and all of her belongings. Garika then drowned Phoenix's room in bleach. It was so loud that you could smell it in the hallways. She then texted the building manager from Phoenix's phone, letting the manager know that she would be moving out. Garika studied Phoenix's text messages, how she typed, how she used her emojis, and then she copied it so she can text back Phoenix's friends and her family while she tries to figure out what to do with Phoenix's body. She even downloaded some type of AI app that chopped up Phoenix's voice notes and voice messages, anything with Phoenix's voice on there, so she could create a response for Phoenix's friends and her family. On April 20th, Garika was seen on camera at a store buying a sleeping bag. Now, one thing I didn't know about the UK is it's cameras everywhere. It's so much CCTV footage of Garika. It was insane. Literally, it's cameras on every street, every corner, every store, everywhere in the UK. On April 22nd, Garika had boarded a train with the 2 suitcases to a place called the Forest of Dean. She had Googled this place, and the Google search said a remote place where a body could not be found. This was a wooded area about 80 miles from the refuge house, and Gorica slept there. She slept there trying to figure out what to do with Phoenix stuffed inside these 2 suitcases. She camped out in these woods, and while she was in the woods, she was still making Google searches. How do killers get caught? Can a body burn to ashes? Can you burn a body with gasoline? Good God. She actually tried to burn one of the suitcases, but without gasoline, I guess it didn't light how she wanted the light. So she eventually went back to Birmingham. But on May 12th, she decided, I got to try this again. So she called a taxi and got a ride to the gas station. She filled up several cans with gasoline. Gorica asked her driver, whose name was Mahesh, if he could take her to the forest of Dean. And we know that's 80 miles away. But surprisingly, Mahesh said yes. When the two got there, it was a little after 10 o'clock. And she asked Mahesh, could he sit here and wait while she go get something from the forest? And he agreed. But Gorica started to take long, really long, to the point where he started to drive around. Mahesh didn't want to leave her, so he just continued to drive around till she came out the forest. But while he was driving around, one of the residents is like, who is this car that keeps circling my house? So they decided to call the police. When the police rolled up on Mahesh, he like, I'm just waiting on my rider. She said she was going to get something from the woods. She's just taking a long time, so I decided to ride around. And the police let him go, but they were still like, what? This don't make no sense. Gorica finally comes back from the woods with the suitcases and said, I'm just going to leave them on the side of the road. While they're trying to drop these suitcases on the side of the road, the police is making a U-turn because, something just didn't sit right with this.
You and your property. You're trying to stop us, which is now really concerning.
No, wait, just listen.
You're going to get arrested for obstructing police.
All right, I don't want to stop you guys.
You are stopping it. You are stopping us.
Okay, could I just explain, because as I said before, like
Step away, please.
I've had issues with that before.
Step away, please.
Just stand there. Okay.
What the f*** is that? That's a person. You are under arrest.
Yeah.
That's a fucking person.
507. Sarge, can we get you down here ASAP, please?
Urgent.
Gorica and Mahesh were both arrested, but Mahesh was quickly acquitted because there was no evidence that he knew what she was doing or what she had done. Gorica pled guilty and her trial kept getting pushed back due to COVID. It finally started on April 21st, 2021. Her mother said that she was a ticking time bomb who never got the help that she desperately needed. It also came out a drunken message from Gorica to Phoenix expressing her feelings. She said her loins were burning. Good Lord. On May 4th, 2021, Gorica Gordon was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Gorica, I know you in that prison giving them women hell. R.I.P. to Phoenix. Cause what the fuck, man?